Good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is that you're listening to this and I actually get it out on YouTube. This is your general counsel, and as you can tell by the title of the video, I want to discuss reasons to doubt that Keffe D, or Dwayne Davis, however you like to call him, is guilty of homicide as it relates to the murder of Tupac Shakur. And the reason why I'm discussing Keffe D's case and reasonable doubt isn't because they've already shown that he's not guilty. They haven't shown that he's not guilty. It's not their job to show that he's not guilty, but reasonable doubt is the defense's theory. And the defense is not focusing on an alibi, so to say that Keffe D couldn't have done it because he was somewhere else. They're not focusing on an affirmative defense, something like self-defense or defense of third person. They're focusing on reasonable doubt. And there's already some facts that have been put on record that gives them the opportunity to fortify their defense. They're gonna have to nail it, put that nail in the coffin during closing arguments, but they have something to work with. And it's important to me to make this video as a form of legal education because the state's case is so easy. Everybody knows what the state's case is. This is the state's case. Keffe D said he did it. Keffe D said he did it again and again and again. He said he did it to this person and that person. Then there's some circumstantial factors that weigh in. Keffe D is a Crip. Tupac was affiliated with Bloods through his security and Suge Knight. Keffe D was running security for Bad Boy. Tupac was with Death Row Records, so on and so forth. Well, actually, those are the two main points of circumstantial evidence. And that's a very easy thing to understand. He said he did it. If I was a prosecution, my theme of closing arguments would be Keffe D's 7 deadly sins. His 7 deadly sins. He killed Tupac. He told FBI that he killed Tupac. He told LAPD that he killed Tupac. He told Metro PD that he killed Tupac. He told the podcaster that he killed Tupac. He wrote a book, said that he killed Tupac. He did a documentary and said that he killed Tupac. These are Keffe D's 7 deadly sins. That would be my theme for closing arguments, just so then they would always focus on that in jury deliberations and have that roadmap inside their mind. 7 things. What were those 7 things again? Oh yeah, he killed Tupac. And then go down the rest of the list of all the times that he admitted it. So the state's case is very easy, and because it's so simple to understand, sometimes we forget that they still have a burden to prove. And that reasonable doubt isn't a great burden when it exists. As soon as it exists, that's not guilty. So there's some things for the defense to work with. Now they have to bring it up and elucidate it to the jury better than I'm going to do right now in this spontaneous video. But there are some things to work with, and I have identified 3. So the first thing I want to point out is that we're going to go straight to the confessions. Keffe D's confession, or admissions against self-interest, to use the legal jargon. None of them have ever been completely against his self-interest. Every single one of his confessions were self-serving. Let's go through the list. First, the FBI. So let me give a little bit of background information first. When people talk to the police, they're trying to give them something that the police want. They're trying to make themselves valuable. Whether that individual is a confidential paid informant, or whether that individual is doing what Keffe D did and trying to mitigate consequences for a separate offense altogether, that person is trying to make himself indisposable and trying to make it seem like he's bigger and has more than what he has. Every single time, almost without fail, particularly when it comes to like financial crimes. We're not talking about someone that just got caught in the act of, domestic violence or something. We're talking about career criminals, people that make money from crime. So, narcotics, gambling, things like this, other things we won't mention on YouTube, but So not one of his admissions against self-interest were truly against his self-interest, because every single one of them were self-serving. Let's start with the FBI. He's trying to mitigate consequences for drug offenses. He has to talk about something. He has to make himself larger than what he is. And we'll go back and hit on exactly what he was talking about later, but let's go through the other 2 confessions. His confession to LAPD, his later confession to Las Vegas PD, or Metro, as they keep referring to in the trial. In every single one of these, what does he do? He says something that's not completely against self-interest. First off, he says that he passed a gun. I didn't do it. I gave it to so-and-so. Oh, okay, you gave it to so-and-so. And then he brings up the bigger fish. Your confession, making yourself an informant is less valuable if there's not a bigger fish. And every single time he brings up the bigger fish, it's Zip and P. Diddy. Oh, he gave him Zip and P. Diddy. Now, if it's not making sense to you yet, why people that are talking to police, talking to law enforcement, why they're always trying to give a bigger fish. This isn't peculiar to Keffe D. Just imagine you went fishing and you go fishing, and let's say you like catfish, right? You catch a huge catfish, and the catfish right before you're about to gut him, he says, wait. Somehow he develops the ability to speak. He says, wait, before you dip me in cornmeal and fry me in oil, what if I told you that I could take you to a whole school of catfish, and each fillet is like 2 pounds. They're like twice my size. Would you go for it? I mean, assuming that catfish could talk, got catfish by catfish. But you get the point. That's exactly 100% what informants do every single time. And that's what Keffe D did in every single one of his confessions. And furthermore, he didn't have the ability to harm anyone else in that situation. What do I mean? First off, his nephew was already deceased. That doesn't mean anything that he loved his nephew and that he didn't want to besmirch his reputation. The reason for that is, once again, once someone's deceased, there's nothing you can do against him. That's not against any street code to say, well, he did it. That's very, very much reaching in that case. The second thing is, when he said that the gun was passed, he said he passed the gun to someone else, and that other person didn't want to take the shot. The other person didn't want to take the shot. So, question for you, if that other person was just in the car and he said that that individual didn't want to take the shot when they spontaneously pulled up on Suge Knight and Tupac, is that person guilty of a homicide or aiding and abetting a homicide? Most people would say no, not according to Keffe D's testimony. So he's not snitching on people that are his actual friend. He's talking about two people in particular, well, three. His nephew, who had long since been deceased, and then Zip and P. Diddy. He's not talking about his friend. He's talking about bigger fish, and then people that he can't even, hurt. Say, for example, T. Brown. I think that's the one that was still alive for a little while when Keffe D was giving his confession. T. Brown wasn't implicated. T. Brown didn't take the gun and decide to shoot. T. Brown didn't take the gun and decide to shoot. His cousin did, or his nephew did. So therefore, I have to point that out. Every single one of those statements were completely self-serving. Well, what about the documentary? He's getting paid. What about the podcast? Once again, he's getting paid. What about the book? He's getting paid. Every single time he's receiving compensation of some sort. And I will say this. Listen to that Metro PD discussion again. The one where his lawyer Higgins was present, and Dupree from LAPD was present as well. He's being seriously coached. I'm listening to this. Maybe it's not as obvious as what we'd expect, but it's very clear that this individual is being told, give them this, don't give them this. And, I'm not saying that Keffe D is stupid, but he's under immense pressure, and he doesn't live in that kind of world. He lives in the kind of world where you buy stuff, sell stuff, backstab some people, make some friends over here, get some money to, give protection, extort this person. That's the world he lives in. He doesn't live in the world where his lawyer's advising him. And his lawyer Higgins, by the way, wow, just as an aside, he looks really bad. Higgins, if you hear this, try to get a waiver from Keffe D after this whole thing is over towards attorney-client privilege, and write a book clarifying this, because I know deep down, Higgins, you must have got some serious mitigation for this entire interview with Metro PD, because it seems really bad. You can't even tell you're his lawyer sometimes. But once again, I have faith that, the man had been his lawyer for quite a long time, and he had to have got him some serious concessions with regard to his pending California drug charges. So that's the first reason for doubt. His confessions, which is the entirety of the state's case, every single one of them were self-serving. Every single one of them, without exception. And he didn't hurt any of his friends with those confessions, and didn't implicate anyone alive with those confessions. That's reasonable doubt number one. Reasonable doubt number two, nothing in his confession that was peculiar to those confessions so far, none of it contained details that were corroborated that weren't already publicly available. We came in there in a white Cadillac, and of course, everyone knew there was a white Cadillac. We shot a 40 cal. Everyone knew it was a 40 cal. What else? We pulled up on them. It was on Flamingo Avenue, or whatever the official name of the street is. Everyone knew that as well. All the information that he gave that was detailed specific towards those shootings that could be corroborated was already public information. This wasn't information that was only known to the detectives. This was known to the entire public, like probably within 48 hours of the shooting, if not less than that. The one thing that they could have probably corroborated, they didn't even try. I mean, did they try? Did they try to corroborate that he was actually in Las Vegas during that time with these several people? You know, they could assume he was there because they know that his cousin or his nephew Orlando Anderson was there, and Orlando, of course, had that famous assault happen to him at the MGM. But what about the other two that he said he was with? T. Brown or whatever his name is, and the other guy that was in the Cadillac with him. Did they corroborate any of that? Did they corroborate that Zip was in Las Vegas during that time? What about this thing with Zip and he had some automatic secret compartment inside of his car? Man, you know, 15 years doing law, I've met a lot of drug dealers. I've never heard of them having this like secret spy compartment inside of the car. And I understand, you know, Zip was somewhat of a big shot. He's affiliated with Bad Boy Records. He's a name in Harlem, so on and so forth. But, you know, still, you know, secret spy compartment in Las Vegas, maybe. But still, did they ever corroborate any of these things? Did they even corroborate that Zip was? I don't recall so far. What about T. Brown? They had one other person alive and they didn't move on it. You're telling me you want me to depend on all of the details he gave and to accept them as fact, and accept when it goes against your case, and we're going to get to that here in a minute, but they weren't important enough to try to corroborate at the time? You know, no, that's not the way it worked. Not for me anyway, as someone that would have the burden of finding the fact, which is what the jury has in this point. So I have to point that out. Nothing in his confessions that's peculiar and to the crime and that's been corroborated wasn't already publicly available information, and that's so far. That's so far. Maybe as the trial goes along, the prosecution has something for us. But as of now, nothing too crazy about his confession. Fine. And there's a third thing, and this is a big one for me. He didn't have antipathy from his rival following that. Not real antipathy, not proven antipathy, and we're going to go over what I mean by that. First off, we have to acknowledge Suge knew very well who he was. They played football together since elementary. He had went swimming at pools at Suge's house, at the pool at Suge's house, and at the barbecue afterward. Suge's dad and his uncle were their football coach. I mean, he knew exactly who Keffe D was. To this day, or during the time of the confessions rather, he'd call Keffe D Big Homie. Big Homie. That's a term of endearment. It really is, at least in that scene. Now let's look at this. If he knows who Keffe D is 100%, he knew who Orlando Anderson was. And he still gave Orlando Anderson that beating. All right? So he knows what's up. And if he knows who Keffe D is, then he knows that Keffe D at the time was willing to retaliate in a similar manner. What most people from that area would be. I mean, you don't have to be in a gang to do that. No lawyers would retaliate in the same night. So it's not something so peculiar. It would be strange to think that Suge Knight thought that was going to go unanswered. That would be bizarre. So why do I bring this up? That he knew very well who Orlando Anderson was and knew very well who Keffe D was. Whenever the police asked Suge Knight, do you know who did it? According to the police officer in the first day of testimony, he said no. He said no. If I'm on the jury, if I believe that, and I understand if we're going to discard that statement. I get it. He doesn't want to talk to cops. That's what I would say as a prosecutor too. But if I'm to believe that statement, let's just assume that we are going to believe Suge Knight that. You don't know who did it. You have no idea? Not guilty. Automatic. Why? Because he knows very well who Keffe D is and very well who Orlando Anderson. So if I were being called to believe that, not guilty. They asked Tupac, do you know who did it? Tupac, no, we'll handle it. Once again, same thing. Tupac knew who these people were, particularly Orlando Anderson. And if we're to assume that what Tupac said that night when he responded no, he didn't know who did it, if we're to assume that that's correct, or that was truthful rather, not guilty, automatic. Of course they knew who did it. They knew. The whole world was screaming Orlando Anderson right after that tape came out. Everyone knew who did it. There is nothing new about who the finger's being pointed at. In 30 years, it's the same direction. And they didn't know? The person that you've been playing football with since elementary and you just beat down his nephew, you know, probably broke his arm. At least the young man thought that his arm got broke. And they didn't know? Of course they knew. You telling me the whole world was saying Orlando Anderson and his family? You know, and his gang, they did it, but Suge didn't know, and Tupac didn't. Very hard to believe. So if Suge, so now I'm going to assume Now I'm going to assume Suge knew. If Suge knew Keffe D did it, and Orlando Anderson did, do you think he would have paid $60,000 to Orlando Anderson to avoid a probation violation? How do we know that he paid that? Because Keffe D said that he paid. And if you're asking me to convict Keffe D based on all of his confessions, then we're going to take all of his confessions as true. We're not going to take the parts as true that you want me to take. We're taking the whole thing as true. Look, guys, no one is going to do that, even to stay out of jail. You know, and I understand we're talking about, well, that's what you say, General Counsel. That's not what Suge Knight would do. $60,000 is nothing to him. Look, guys, they just killed his best friend, or, you know, one of his friends. Not only that, they killed someone that he invested millions of dollars in. Millions of dollars in 90s money. $1 million now is a lot of money. I'll take $1 million, guys, but $1 million ain't what it used to. It's not. $1 million in the 90s, millions, and that's what he invested in Tupac, and they murdered him right in front of him and almost killed him too. They almost killed Suge Knight. Now I'm going to pay you to lie for me? That's not going to happen, guys. It doesn't make sense. And once again, me personally, the principle I have, unless you give me a specific reason not to, I'm going to take that entire thing, that entire confession as true, because you're telling me to convict him on the basis of it. If it's not true, and there's lies all sprinkled all throughout it, then it's not guilty. It's not guilty unless you give me a separate reason to corroborate the specific statements that you would have me take as true. And the state hasn't done that yet. They still have plenty of time. So here's the other thing going on, that they didn't receive any retribution from their rival. Suge calls him Big Homie. If you just try to kill me, I knew you since we were in elementary. You came and swam at my pool. My dad cooked burgers for you after the game. And you try to murder me? I'm not calling you Big Homie. Keffe D said there was a $100,000 bounty on all of their heads. You're telling me Suge Knight put a $100,000 bounty on Keffe D's head, on Orlando Anderson's head, and the other two gentlemen? There's a $100,000 bounty on his head. There was a gang war. People got shot. At least one person in the Southside Compton Crips faction got murdered. You know, as a result for this, I understand people got murdered, but as a direct result of this Tupac homicide. You're telling me that, but none of those 4 people inside of that car took consequences from the other side, ever? And that Suge called him Big Homie to this day, or at least to the day of the confession? And that Suge Knight paid this individual $60,000 shortly after to try to beat the probation violation case? That's too much to believe. For me, that is too much to believe. I can't accept that. Furthermore, he knows that this individual runs security for Bad Boy Records. He knew that. Suge Knight knew that. And Suge Knight is surrounded by all of these Mob Piru members, and they can't figure out with their collective brain power that, hey, I'm pretty sure this guy that y'all kicked his ass over there at the MGM, of course it was him and Keffe D. It's common sense. Of course, it does not take a genius. The entire world was saying that. The entire world that was paying attention was saying that within, 48, 72 hours after the homicide, or, after the attempted homicide. And then, of course, Tupac died a little while after. So those are the 3 reasons for reasonable doubt, in my opinion. Now, I don't know what the jury's thinking. This is something, as an attorney, it's more of an art than a science. You can't get inside someone's head. That's why you have to be a human being up there. And it's more difficult than what it looks like on the spot. And we saw that on the first day when what was his name? He was the Mob Piru member that was he was a grandfather. I forget his name. But anyway, we saw how the defense attorney was taken aback when that individual pointed to this man's client, Keffe D, and said, "You don't want me to say that because I'll get him in trouble." The defense was taken aback by it. The defense was taken aback by that. He didn't know what to do. Because in those situations, it's a lot more difficult to respond after a long day at court for something that's a complete surprise than it would be for, your own witness when every single question is going to plan. That's just my opinion. The defense still has a long way to go. Of course, the prosecution has a long way to go. But it's important for me to make this video just because I wanted to bring up why it's not an open and shut case for the state. The state has one case, let me reiterate. He told him. Once you realize that every time that he told on himself, whether in media or to law enforcement, it was self-serving statement. Once you realize that he didn't implicate or hurt his living friends, once you realize that he didn't give any information that wasn't already publicly available, and once you realize that it's unreasonable that the other side didn't know he was involved, and it's unreasonable for him to maintain that relationship and not have received violence from the other side in the immediate aftermath, then reasonable doubt exists, and it's up to the defense to put that together within their theory. We have at least a couple more weeks of trial. I know they said it was going to be a month or even more. That's a beast of a trial right there. That's an abominable amount of time. It's crazy. I've never seen a trial last this long. It's not common. It's not common. But that's just a video I wanted to get out. Tomorrow's another day, Monday, and I guess the state probably has at least 2 more weeks in the case in chief, and we'll see where they take it from here.